this physical entity of magnetic flux is existing across the time zones. For it to exist, it will have to exist across the time zones, which is not possible because magnetic flux is a physical continuous structure. The nature of the magnetic flux is continuous in nature, whereas the space near the black hole is divided into time zones, and that is how magnetic flux cannot exist near the black hole. So this is what is going to help us understand why the mass which is nearing the black hole behaves the way it does. So let's go to the next slide. So what we have is, as I said, when the mass which is approaching the vicinity of the black hole, it has many options, infinite options to fall in. Let us assume that it is not a black hole which is spinning. It is just a extremely dense mass, and it has an attractional force. So the mass, whichever way it is coming, it has to come and fall into the black hole or near that mass. Now, the fact that it is spinning, ideally, if it was just a sphere, it can enter from any angle. But now what we see in black hole is that, first of all, it is not straight, in the sense the moment it is coming towards the black hole, it is bending. After bending, it is getting into circular shapes, which in a plane which is perpendicular to the axis, and then which is along the equatorial line. So we need to find out why is that the mass is going through a particular path. Why is it not taking all those infinite options that are available to the mass? So what I have done is I have tried dividing or categorizing those planes or paths which are available for the mass to take. They are basically into two categories. One is off center, another is through the center. When I say off center, 1 and 2, this is 1 which is off center. It is not going through the center, and the other is going through the center. Now again, in each type which is off center, there are two types. One is that it could be at any angle to the axis of rotation, or it could be at perpendicular axis. You can have many parallel axes which are perpendicular to the axis of rotation. And the other two options which are there is going through the center, 3 and 4. These are concentric in nature, and the 4 is the one which is the equatorial plane, which finally the mass ends up taking. So we are now trying to prove that of the 1, 2, 3 and 4, the mass takes only the 4. So we need to eliminate 1, 2 and 3 as options for the mass to take, and then show that the only option left is the line 4. So how does that happen? So let us first address the issue of the curvature. As it can be seen here in this picture, the mass which is getting sucked into the black hole, to begin with, it is straight, and then it starts bending. So how does this bending start happening? Let us assume that we had talked about time dilation and various time zones existing across in the vicinity of the black hole. So let us assume that in the near vicinity of the black hole, where the time is not greatly affected by the existence of the black hole, the time zone is, let us call it as T0. And when it is in the region of T0, the mass is going straight. But moment it hits the region which is T1, which is a different time zone, that is where the threshold of the black hole starts. That is where the time differences start making a sizable difference. That is when the mass which is trying to enter through the black hole, the mass doesn't have a time machine. For it to just go radially forward, it will have to have time machine, because that's the only way you can cross the time zones. but Mars doesn't have time machine, so it'll have to bend bend in concentric circles around the curvature of the black hole. Now, why does it get into the concentric circle, or why does it get into a circular motion? Is because there is attractional force from the core. So obviously it cannot just stay where it is. It has to either go radially towards the core, which it cannot do. So when it is bending, obviously it is taking the path of the curvature. Now, how does that concentric circle, then how would the mass move from one time zone to the other? If possibly the axis or the rotation of the black hole was stable in nature, the mass would be stuck in a particular concentric circle forever. But the fact that the axis of the rotation is not stable, then the mass has a chance to move into a vortex. Another possibility is that the mandate of the mass is to reach the core. So it will have to somehow cheat the time zone by moving into the concentric circles in a vortex structure, but surely not through time zones T1 directly to T2 to T3 to T4, but going through the concentric circles in vertical form and then trying to reach the core. Now, we have now proved that the mass generally moves into a particular plane, which is concentric circles and having a vortex structure. But then now we need to see why is it that it takes a particular plane, which is equatorial plane, which is perpendicular to the axis of rotation. So let us see 1 and 2. So let us assume that the mass which is going through the concentric circles in this angled position reaches the center, but the center is far away from the center of the core. The mandate of the mass is to reach the core. So this plane is not an option for the mass because the mandate is to reach the core. It is not reaching the core. In the same way, all those planes which are in the nature of 2 also get eliminated. So now we have 3 and 4. Why is it that this is also a concentric circle? In the sense it is going through the center, the plane 3. Why does it not choose plane 3? See, in universe, energy is spent very carefully. It is spent only to the extent of as much as is required. Now try and imagine the mass has 2 options, either time 3 or time 4. Now T1, T2, T3, T4 that is existing on the plane 4, if you drop it onto plane 3, similarly T1, T2, T3, T4, you will see that for a particular time zone, the distance traveled is the highest in plane 3 and it is the least and most efficient in plane 4, and hence the mass, instead of choosing all these planes which are going through the center at an angle to the axis of rotation, it chooses line 4, and hence the plane line 3 get eliminated. So what is left now is only line 4, and the mass chooses only the plane which is shown as line 4. That is how the mass, instead of all the infinite options of falling into a black hole, ends up taking a path which is equatorial in nature and it is perpendicular to the axis of rotation. From this, another corollary that we try and develop is that the much of black hole is empty. When you see the northern hemisphere, if we could call that, northern and southern hemisphere of the black hole above this equatorial line is empty. The mass is limited or concentrated only along the line or the plane 4. So it is in a way follows the accretion disk, the plane of the accretion disk. It keeps following till the mass reaches